Hi everyone, and welcome to our webinar training on focal trees. To introduce myself, my name is Ellie Perry, and I'm an LA Programs Consultant with the EARTHWATCH'S Institute. And I'm here today to train you through our focal tree protocol, as well as give you more background on organization, as well as our program as a whole. So let's get started. So for those of you who are not familiar with the EARTHWATCH Institute, it is an internationally based nonprofit with several locations throughout the world as well as the US. But in general, this as a nonprofit, our main mission is to engage people worldwide in scientific field research and education to promote understanding and action necessary for a sustainable environment. So the main form that takes shape in is basically citizen science. So we take volunteers and the public on expeditions to help them assist researchers in the field and hopefully get an appreciation for the science behind environmental protection and kind of the research that's going on. So in terms of how that plays into our training today, so this training webinar is designed to essentially train you to become a citizen scientist with us. And basically become a team leader and be able to lead groups of citizen scientists in the field. So when we say groups of citizen scientists, we actually mean, it could be yourself, it could be friends, it could be colleagues, maybe a couple family members, but essentially anyone who's interested in this topic and wants to become a citizen scientist and actually help researchers with urban ecology research in our area. And in terms of the objectives of this training today, we want to again give you some sort of introduction to the Southern California Urban Forest Program, as well as give you a little guidance on leading groups of citizen scientists in the field, some training on risk management and safety, obviously demonstrate the urban tree data collection measures that we're asking you to go out and do. And ultimately to help create a regional network of fellow team leaders to support urban tree research in the Los Angeles and greater Los Angeles region. So in addition to individuals, we also work with a many number of partners in the area. So if you take a quick look at this list, this is just a very small fraction of all the different partners that we work with in the greater Los Angeles region. And these nonprofits and local government entities have been very, very helpful in terms of being able to field volunteers who are willing to help us in collecting this data. But again, this is also geared towards individuals. So, K through 12 teachers or retired individuals or people who just have some spare time on their hands. Basically, anyone who wants to get involved can join this network and really support our research goals. So we're very excited to have you be on this webinar and actually join us in this project. So in terms of our program, so we do have an urban forest / resiliency program here in the Los Angeles region, and we have three major aims in running this program. So first of all, we of course support the science. So we want to gain a better understanding of the urban tree benefits in the Los Angeles region, particularly in relation to the cooling benefits and the water use of the trees in our urban forests. Secondly, we want to use the research that comes out of this to basically influence local action on the ground. So we don't want to just do the research and have it not lead to anything. We actually want to share these research findings with local urban planners or policy makers to basically use this data and help influence the shape of our urban forests for years to come. Thirdly, we also want to engage people in this process. So by having participants actually contribute to the science, they're hopefully getting a better understanding and learn about the value of urban trees in their environment. And actually contribute to this local action. So that's those are the three aims that we're trying to shoot for with running this program. So for this project specifically, it might be helpful to get a little background on where this research project came from and what our aims are for that. So as I mentioned before, EARTHWATCH, the EARTHWATCH Institute is a very large organization. We also have a lot of different projects and field activities in various places throughout the United States, including Southern California and the greater Los Angeles region. So this particular project is run through the Urban Forest / Resiliency Program. And what that looks like here in our area is that we have a major research partnership with the Generate Lab over at UC Riverside. So we partner with the lab to essentially provide the citizen scientists and support in encouraging the citizen scientists to go out and collect data so that the UC Riverside lab can use that for their research. So the first module or phase that we really began with was back when we started this research partnership in 2014. The lab was looking to get a baseline, essentially, of what our urban forests look like in our region. So what they were doing is essentially taking data from NASA spy planes and basically using those maps and the temperature readings and the data that they were collecting on vegetation growth to try to correlate that to their own research and understand what was going on. But in order to actually use that data, they used our citizen scientists to go and ground truth a lot of the trees on the ground. So, NASA would tell them, like, here's a giant map of all the vegetation growth. And individual citizen scientists would go down and actually collect leaf samples from these trees. So the lab could do a further analysis and actually correlate that to what NASA was telling them. So that was the very first phase of the project. It wrapped up in August of 2015. It was very successful. And based on that really healthy baseline the lab now has, they've now moved into the second phase of the project, which we refer to as focal trees. So the focal tree module is essentially the next phase of this ongoing project. And that started running in July of 2015 and is projected to continue all the way up until December 2016. So it's a very long-running project and might even continue beyond December 2016, depending on how much data they're able to collect. Additionally, once that second phase of the project wraps up, we're actually planning on continuing this with other modules on different topics related to this overall research project. So we highly encourage you to stay engaged. So even after the focal tree module wraps up, there will be other opportunities and other types of projects to get involved with. So we highly encourage you to stay in touch with us, and especially starting with the focal tree module, but also moving forward into the future. So based on that kind of grand overview, do want to get into the focal tree module since that is what you're here for today. So for the focal tree module, you only need a couple of items in terms of equipment to actually get started. So to actually go out and collect the citizen science data in support of this project, all you really need is essentially a smartphone or a GPS device. Beyond that, it's just any basic measuring tape that measures in inches, as well as just a string that's been cut to 33 feet. And obviously this webinar will go into what we do with those items. But in terms of overall equipment, very, very low maintenance. Additional items you may want to consider. We say that a friend is optional because it does help to have someone to keep you company and carry things and help you measure and things like that. But not until a mandatory requirement. You could theoretically do this by yourself if you wanted to. Additionally, we do have a Dropbox folder we'll give you access to, and we'll have instructions for that in this webinar. But essentially, the Dropbox will contain a lot of templates and guides and instruction manuals that you can use and print in order to go out and support your data collection, essentially. Third thing is basically just some very, very basic office supplies. So things like pens or clipboards to kind of help you carry things, write stuff down and take that out into the field with you. So in terms of equipment needs, again, very, very simple. So don't get dismayed in terms of the equipment that we're asking for. So in terms of ways that we support you in your data collection, so as a citizen scientist, there's a lot of steps that go into planning and preparing. So essentially, before you go out into the field, you obviously need to go and prepare, any equipment or items that you need. When you get out there, you want to be able to lead the group and actually walk them through the methodology. Once you have the group together and you're in the field, actually managing the data that's being collected and the group management as well. And ultimately, you want to be able to review and reflect and say, what went well, what went poorly, how am I doing in terms of the data that I'm submitting. So EARTHWATCH provides a couple of different resources to support you through all 4 steps. So the first way we support you in that is that we provide free toolkit rentals. So we have staging areas throughout Los Angeles and even out to Riverside and Palm Desert. So we have these reusable bags that just contain a GPS device, some laminated field guides, pens, clipboards, basic things like that. If you really don't want to go out and buy the stuff on your own or you don't have it, you're welcome to rent it from any one of those locations. So in terms of equipment, we can get you a toolkit if you need it. Additionally, again, we have that Dropbox folder that contains the templates and instructions and packing lists that you might need in terms of information. And the third way we support you is that we have a monthly email newsletter in which we provide feedback from the lab. So for example, if we got enough data or enough Chihuahua this month and we need more data from Coast Live Oaks, we'll let you know that via the monthly newsletter. So email is very important in terms of how we communicate with you and any other volunteers you want us to plug in. Another important communication role that the email newsletter plays is also announcements to volunteers about other citizen scientist events, as well as if, for example, the lab comes out and wants to do a public presentation on what they've discovered, that's how we'll stay in touch with you and let you know that that's coming up. So basically, we provide all these resources in hopes of helping you, or rather hope that you can help us with our data collection efforts. So there's that. So before we get into the project itself, we did want to provide you a couple tips on how to lead groups of citizen scientists out into the field. So the Earthwatch Institute is actually very famous for running expeditions. So we're kind of, in terms of risk management, we're at the level where we're used to sending people out to go study lions in Africa. So obviously our risk management framework is very sophisticated in terms of managing and identifying those risks. However, you going out into your local park or your backyard might not be at the same level of risk, but we did want to provide you with this general framework to help you in managing them. So again, the definition, as we define it at least, of risk is any potential for harm. So in terms of taking you through this framework, a good example might be bee stings. So, if you go out to your local park, there's a risk or potential for harm in that area. So the first step to kind of dealing with that risk is essentially identifying and assessing. So the very first step is to say, okay, what kind of hazards are there in terms of bees or traffic or, someone rolling an ankle? And then moving to the next step of mitigating. So that's basically the process of saying, okay, well, if that's a risk, like maybe we should avoid this particular area of the park because there's a known beehive in this particular corner, or, we're going to take this to a park that doesn't have as much traffic nearby. And then the third step is basically to disclose. So, you can only mitigate so much when it comes to risk. So the third step would be to disclose that to your participants. So if you got a group, just warning them about things like, oh, there's a beehive in that corner of the park, or, be careful of this intersection, and letting them help to manage and mitigate the risks themselves. Also, as a fourth step, we recommend you have some sort of response plan in place. So, bringing that first aid kit, or knowing the number of the local hospital, or having a emergency plan in place to make sure that someone has a charged cell phone in case they need to dial 911. So basically using all these steps to kind of navigate through the risk specific to your location and to the site that you're planning to take people out in. Also, final recommendation on this is to make sure that if you're working on behalf of an organization or you're taking a group of people from a specific organization, is that you definitely want to consult their existing liability procedures or coverage if that applies to you. Same thing if you're a K-12 teacher, working with your school to help identify that before you go out. So yeah, feel free to use that framework in planning your events. Some additional feedback or some additional guidance in terms of event planning. So before you even go out to your event, we like to use the who, what, when, where, why, and how framework. So to start off, so thinking about who, so knowing your audience, basically thinking of their personal safety and comfort. Understanding there are huge differences between, let's say, taking out a group of kindergartners versus a group of college students versus a group of adults, and making sure that they're comfortable and that they're safe and you're accommodating their specific needs. Also thinking about the what. So this methodology is very dependent on specific types of trees. So understanding the protocol will be really vital for that purpose. So for example, you don't want to take a group out to a street filled with only pine trees if, we're not studying pine trees for this methodology. So thinking about things like that in advance. Also thinking about the when, so picking a good date and time, trying to avoid high traffic periods or holidays or things like that, making sure that that's going to work for your volunteers. Also the where, thinking very carefully again about your specific site or where you're going to go, making sure everyone has supplies, you know, anything weird about the site in terms of like parking or safety or getting there, you know, things like that. It's going to be really helpful in planning a good event. Also the why. So motivating participants is going to be really important to get repeat participants. So you definitely want them to come back and support your data collection efforts, and hopefully get involved themselves. So, you know, making sure that they understand the why of where their data is going and what it's being used towards. Also thinking of the how, you know, any group organization, you know, if you have a big group or a small group, how are you going to distribute the equipment? Who's going to be the one collecting the data and sending that back to the lab? Basically just thinking about all that stuff before you even go out into the field. And once you're on site, you as the team leader have a few extra responsibilities in terms of, you know, since you're the one familiar with the methodology, I would recommend providing at least some sort of general orientation into the data collection tasks, as well as a general safety briefing to make sure that the participants stay safe. Also, educating participants on the larger picture is really important. So this next section will really help with that in terms of understanding where the data goes. As well as managing the group dynamics. So, you know, making sure people aren't, you know, getting lost or they're underworked or overworked or getting distracted, and that sort of thing. And ultimately ensuring usable quality data gets returned to the lab because, you know, you want to make sure that the group understands the methodology well enough that they're really providing high quality data that the lab can actually use. And as a final responsibility, we do encourage you to collect participant email addresses for a couple different reasons. So first reason is that it's very hard to track our program progress or know how many volunteers are going out there unless you're also reporting back to us in terms of, you know, these are the number of people that are coming out with me in this data collection. Second reason, again, you know, we use email a lot for our email newsletters, so that's the only way we really have of communicating with volunteers. So if you can make an extra effort to collect those when you're on site, that would be really helpful to us. Okay, so now diving into the actual research and the environmental issues framing the actual project. So when it comes to urban forests, there are a lot of environmental issues that tie into their health and how they grow and how they're being influenced by things like climate change or urban heat islands or the drought. So there's a lot of interplay between these factors and urban forests. But to sum it up, essentially all global warming models and predictions basically say it's just going to get really, really hot in our area. So as you can see by the graphic, you can see that dark red pretty much just expanding all throughout the greater Los Angeles and Southern California region. So that's going to have a huge impact on our urban forests, right? So in terms of research questions, that's a very good question to ask is, you know, how is this general heating going to affect our urban forests in our region? So diving down into Los Angeles specifically, or Los Angeles area specifically, some of you may have seen this study before, but based on more detailed climate modeling in terms of how many extreme heat days, as defined by how many days are going to exceed 95 degrees Fahrenheit, basically that's going to go, the number of extreme heat days is going to go up everywhere. So everywhere that's currently experiencing a couple extreme heat days is basically just going to experience more over time. So again, how are those extreme heat days going to play into the health of our urban forests and how they're going to thrive in the future? And on top of the general heating trend from global warming, there's also the added effect from the urban heat island effect. So as a reminder, urban heat island effect is basically the fact that urban surfaces like buildings and concrete and parking lots and asphalt tend to retain heat much better than vegetation in cooler areas like parks. So you can see from this graph, especially where that blue circle is, you can see a pretty big dip right over parks and areas where there are a lot of trees, right? So in terms of providing that cooling benefit, you know, like urban trees actually have or could be a very, very valuable tool in terms of adapting to climate change or adapting to these hotter conditions. So that brings me to urban trees specifically. So there are a lot of benefits associated with urban trees in our environment. So as I mentioned before, there's that nice cooling benefit, as you saw from the previous graph, where, you know, if you're walking in a really, you know, middle of downtown Los Angeles on a hot day, and you walk under a tree, it feels better, right? There's this nice cooling benefit that's being provided by having these trees here. Additionally, trees provide habitat for urban wildlife. They provide health benefits. So in addition to, taking greenhouse gases out of the atmosphere, they also have, and also the air quality benefits that come out of trees filtering pollutants. There's also a mental health benefit in terms of people actually scientifically have been proven to get happier around trees. People feel better if they're able to see vegetation and trees in their environment. And on top of that, they also increase property value. So, who wouldn't really want a nice, beautiful oak tree in their backyard? So in terms of their monetary benefit, there's also their increase in property values is also very important. However, there are some costs associated with maintaining trees in this type of environment. Obviously, with the drought, a huge issue is water. So, if you're planting a tree, that tree needs to be watered over the course of its lifetime if you want to keep it alive. So, how are these water resources going to be allocated? Also, in terms of maintenance, it's, somebody has to go around, and mulch these trees or keep them healthy or trim them or take, all of those things factor into their maintenance costs. So it's going to be very important in terms of urban planning to decide, which trees belong where, and kind of weighing these costs and benefits and deciding that. So to help answer some of these questions about urban trees and the urban forest, we're working again with a lab at UC Riverside, which is headed up by Dr. Daryl Jenrett, his postdoc, Dr. Sherry Shiflett, as well as his grad student, Peter Ibsen. And the Jenrett lab as a whole has about 15 years of urban ecology research in terms of examining these types of questions, which is why we wanted to work with them. So to sum up their research in very broad strokes, so the general question that they're trying to answer is, what is the relationship between tree growth and water use? So tree growth is used as a proxy for cooling because obviously a much bigger tree is able to provide more cooling or more shade than a smaller tree. So if you want to take a look at this somewhat scientific graph I've tried to reduce down to more simple terms, but essentially what you want to look at is on the y-axis, there's growth, right? So that's how fast the tree is growing. Or how quickly it is, as well as on the x-axis is water use. So how many gallons per year is this tree consuming? And if you look at the different species, so for example, on the first circle to your left, we have this nice kurrajong that's growing at a certain rate and using a certain amount of water over the course of its lifetime. However, if you look directly to the right, to the second blue circle, we have a honey locust. So if you compare the two on this graph, you can see that the honey locust is growing at pretty much the same rate as the kurrajong, or providing the same amount of cooling benefit. However, during that process, it's using a lot more water over the course of its lifetime. So understanding these relationships is really important in terms of deciding what to plant. So if we had these nice profiles for all the species that we're interested in planting, that could be very valuable in terms of determining the right tree for the right place. So the lab is essentially trying to provide this, basically fill in this graph for specific species. And the reason why that's important is because it's not really quantitatively known in terms of understanding. People might have a general sense that natives use less water, but there's no quantitative evidence or understanding of other tree species in terms of how they perform. On top of that, they also are, in terms of this general question, like which tree species are providing the most cooling, what is their water use efficiency versus their cooling benefit ratio across particular tree species, but also does it vary across microclimates. So for example, if this tree is in the middle of a parking lot, is it using more water than a tree that's in the middle of a park? So kind of asking, how are these microclimates affecting the tree performance? As well as how does this performance vary across regions in terms of how much water they're using? So for example, if you have a coast live oak in Santa Monica, are we sure that it's using the same amount of water as a coast live oak in Riverside? So being able to draw these correlations and build these species profiles will be really important in terms of an urban planning, from an urban planning perspective, but also understanding, and using that as a model for global warming as well. So as our region gets hotter, how are our trees going to be doing and how's the urban forest going to perform over time? So that's the general research question. And the lab is also following up with these questions by doing very detailed analysis and other things. So basically analyzing the leaves themselves from specific trees, looking at their mass and nitrogen content and water content, and ultimately using some of the biometric data collected by citizen scientists to help determine these relationships and these correlations across regions. So this is basically where you come in. So obviously myself or the lab, in terms of individuals, we can only go out and measure so many trees. However, if we're working with a lot of different citizen scientists and a whole army of volunteers who are willing to go out and spend a little bit of time to go measure these trees, we can basically help complete the research a lot faster. So in terms of where the citizen scientists come in, what we're looking for is support on collecting biometric data on 10 specific tree species. So these 10, for any individual tree of the species, we're trying to get their GPS location, how big they are, as well as their percent permeable surface around that tree. So again, that question of, is this you're in the middle of an asphalt block or is it in the middle of a park? So the 10 species are represent 3 major categories. So we have some trees that are California natives, because that's obviously very important in terms of, how are the natives performing in a hotter environment, as well as a secondary category of traditional or classically planted trees. So these are the trees that were really popular in the 70s and 80s. Everyone planted them everywhere, and now they're all over the place, so we want to know how they're doing. Thirdly, we also have trees of the future. So these are the trees that are being planted today. So these are the ones that are going up in all the new construction projects. These are ones that are kind of being put in now. So we want to understand their performance across regions as well. So the 10 tree species, I should mention, we have a list on Dropbox, which again, you'll have access to. And you can see that most of those trees are very common or very easy to identify. But, in terms of those 10 tree species, once we collect enough data from those 10 species, we're basically looking at maybe a quarterly or every few months shifting over to a new set of 10 that again fall in those 3 categories. So in terms of identifying the tree species, we'll continue to provide you with some sort of tree key ID on the Dropbox, where it just provides a list of 10 trees, how to identify them, color pictures, and all basically fields like that. So that's the general plan in terms of the 10 tree species that we're trying to look at. So before you go out and start measuring, again, it is very important to find the right species. So again, always consult the tree key ID for the latest list of what we're looking for. So on the Dropbox, you'll be able to download the PDF and print that out for yourself, as well as we have laminated versions of this in our toolkits as well. But also continue to look for email updates from us. So again, that monthly newsletter is where we'll put the lab's ongoing wish list for which species we're short on. So for example, if we don't have enough data on coast live oaks, we can put that in our email newsletter and you'll be able to see it in terms of, hey, we did a really good job of identifying jacaranda in all these regions, but now we need another species. So again, email newsletter will be very important for communicating that. Secondly, it's important to also pick a good area. So what we're looking for in terms of trees to measure is just new trees that we haven't mapped before, that are established, as in, they weren't planted yesterday and they don't still have the stilts or anything, they've been in the ground for a while, as well as healthy trees. So we just want to measure any trees that are kind of representative of, they're in an urban area that they wouldn't be in otherwise, they're being supported and they're healthy. So basically any tree that's the right species that meets that criteria is something we want data from. In terms of seeing the trees that we've already mapped or other citizen scientists have already mapped, we have a page on iNaturalist, which will eventually embed on our soon to be launched website. But essentially, you can see it on iNaturalist now on our Focal Tree Project page, and you can actually see all the different data points and trees that have been measured. So feel free to consult that as a resource in terms of planning where you go next. Additionally, again, pay attention to species diversity as well. So 10 species is actually quite a lot. So for example, if you see a fellow citizen scientist and maybe measured all the jacarandas on your street, that doesn't mean that they've measured all the coast live oaks. So paying attention to all of those different species that are on that list will be really helpful in terms of filling in the gaps and making sure everything is captured in your area. Speaking of areas, we also are working with a very, very broad study region in terms of all the places that we're trying to get tree data from. So looking at this entire map represents the whole area that we're looking to get data from. So you can see in the blue, outlined in the blue, we need to get trees from the coastal area, as well as the central region, which is in pink, inland area, which is in yellow, as well as the desert, which is in green. So as you can see, it's pretty much all like on that entire east through west corridor throughout the greater Los Angeles region. So basically for any one of these areas, we could use your help. So I highly encourage you to get friends or colleagues or even spread this to other people you know in these various regions because we could use the data. Okay, so let's get into the actual field task. So you as a citizen scientist, if you want to participate and help us in collecting this data, which we greatly appreciate, essentially we need, for any given tree, we need its GPS location, the tree species, the trunk diameter, canopy width, and the % permeable surface around that tree. So we're going to go into each of these tasks in detail on what we're looking for. So to start off, we obviously need to know where that tree is located, which involves getting their GPS location. So all of these field tasks have options depending on whether you have a GPS device or a smartphone. So if you have a smartphone, basically what you need to do is just download the iNaturalist app. It's just like any other app. You can go find it in your Google or iPhone store. But essentially, when you download the app, it'll give you an option for using the GPS in your phone to detect the GPS coordinate. And basically, we'll have additional instructions on iNaturalist towards the end of this webinar. But essentially, just be patient with it so that your phone has some time to calibrate with the satellites and be a little more accurate. But if you don't have a smartphone, the second option is to just use a dedicated GPS device. Either our toolkits come with GPS devices if you want to borrow those, or if you happen to have a GPS device at home, either way. And if you have the GPS device, we essentially just want you to take 2 measurements for accuracy because this is such an important field. So basically just take the measurement, reset it and take it again, and record that on your data collection sheet. Additionally, either way, we need you to record to at least 4 decimal points on that GPS coordinate. And the reason for that is if the number of decimal points is the measure of accuracy. So if you have more decimal points, that's great, but we need at least 4 to be able to use the data. So in terms of resources, we do have how-to guides on our toolkit, which basically walks through how to use one of our GPS devices, which may also apply to any GPS device that you have, since they're all pretty similar. However, towards that end, we also want to show you a quick video on what we're looking for so that you can go ahead and use that in terms of your field tasks. So here we go.
Hi, my name is Hita, and today I'm going to teach you how to take a GPS point when you're out measuring trees. Today we're using the Garmin eTrex 20. You might be using the same device or a slightly different one. For any device you're using, the first thing we want to do is make sure the settings are correct. Here, we're going to go in the menu and select Setup. Within Setup, we want to check and make sure that the position format is correct. So we'll select Position Format. The format that we want is decimal degrees to at least 4 decimal places. So I'm going to select that option in the menu. You only have to do this once in your day, and then it'll be all set for all the trees that you measure. Now, we're on to measuring our trees. We're going to use the waypoint averaging option in our menu because it gives us the most accurate measurement by using several satellites, but it takes a little bit more time. We select waypoint averaging, and then next select Create Waypoint. Set the GPS device down at the base of the tree because it's going to take a little while for all of the measurements to be taken. Now you can go and measure anything else you need in the tree, like DBH, species, or anything else you need to know. When you're done with that, come back to your GPS device, pick it up, and the sample confidence should say 100%. Save the GPS location on your device, and also read it out to your partner for the data sheet. This tree is at 42.30648 degrees north and 71.12135 degrees west. Select Done, and now you're ready to move on to your next tree.
Great. So hopefully you found that video to be instructional. And of course, it is available on YouTube if you want to go ever review the slides and take a look. So the next field obviously is to identify the species. So hopefully you had a general indication of what that species was in terms of approaching that tree, which again should be on the tree ID key list. So hopefully it's one of those 10 species that's on that key. So again, that's in the toolkits or in the Dropbox. But a second resource that you might want to use in terms of making sure that you're measuring the right, or the tree that you're measuring is the right species, is your fellow volunteers. So if you're going out in a group, you can never really know if one of the volunteers in your group is just really well versed in botany, or they just went to Home Depot recently and bought this tree, or they just happen to recognize it. So it never hurts to go ahead and ask your group to see if anyone can make a positive ID on that species. Again, we understand that it can be very stressful to make sure that you're actually IDing the tree correctly. So we do have a couple fail-safe options for you. So if you have the smartphone and you're using that option and have the iNaturalist app, as you're filling out the fields, you can always click the ID help button and actually take pictures with your smartphone and upload it to that data point. And by clicking that option, the lab knows to take a look at your photos and actually double check on the identification and make sure, as they do have trained botanists and specialists on staff to be able to do that. So again, just take lots of pictures, upload that with your data point. And if you're using the GPS device option, just make sure that you take pictures and with either your camera or just your regular phone, and you can email that along to the lab along with your data. Just make sure you ID that picture with some sort of data point description, just so that they can correlate that and be like, okay, well, this data point belongs to this picture. So then again, they can use a specialist to help ID the tree. So moving on to measuring trunk diameter. So this is another field that we're interested in, and diameter is measured, always measured 4.5 feet above the ground, because this is a scientific term called diameter breast height. If you ever use a diameter DBH tape, which is what the next video will actually go into, one point is that you always want to watch out for the tenths. So for example, if you're using our toolkits and use the DBH tapes inside of them, you want to be really careful that you're reading that correctly. So for example, in that picture above where we have the red circle, that tree is about 11 inches in diameter, not 90.11 or 11 or like 80.911 or anything like that. Basically just looking at the measures to make sure you're actually reading that correctly. But on that topic, we also understand that measuring at 4.5 feet off the ground doesn't always work in terms of representing how big that tree actually is. So for example, if you're trying to measure at 4.5 feet and there's a giant fork in the trunk, or this tree has like some weird love handles on it, or weird bump right at 4.5 feet, where if you measure it at that point, it's not really representative of how thick around that tree actually is. So there are other ways to get around it and where to measure. But basically, we do have another video for you that might help illuminate that a little bit. So I'll pull that up right now. Okay, so let's see. We have our diameter training.
Hi, my name's Vanessa, and I'm going to show you how to measure tree diameter. Tree diameter is a common measurement made by scientists and citizen scientists. As trees are continually growing wider as well as taller, diameter can give you an idea of the overall size, age, growth rate of a tree, and also the amount of carbon that is stored in the trunk. To ensure that trees are measured in a consistent location, scientists measure trees at 4.5 feet above the ground, or 1.3 meters. This ensures that the place we measure today will be the same place we measure 5, 10, or 50 years from now. Scientists measure tree diameter with a DBH tape. DBH stands for diameter at breast height. This tape has normal inches on one side, just as a ruler would, or it might be centimeters. The zero on the DBH tape is not at the end, so you can use this side to step on. Or you can measure where 4.5 feet is on your own body and use this as a guide for measuring multiple trees. Diameter is the distance through the middle of a circle, whereas circumference is the distance around the edge. The other side of the DBH tape shows the distance in diameter equivalents. But if you don't have a special DBH tape, you can just measure the circumference of the tree, and we can use geometry to calculate diameter later. To measure the diameter of the tree, you wrap the tape around the tree, making sure that the diameter side of the tape is showing if you have a DBH tape. Make sure that the tape is level and untwisted. You pull the tape tight and measure at the 0 line. This tree is 15.3 inches. Make sure the recorder in your group writes that down. You can easily wind up the tape when you're done using the crank. Some trees are not as straightforward to measure. For large trees, use the hook to grip the bark, or have a partner help you. Is it level? This tree is 35 inches in diameter. For trees with multiple trunks, measure and record the diameter of each trunk separately. Do not add the values together. If a trunk is leaning, measure 4.5 feet on the side closest to the ground. And measure diameter perpendicular to the trunk. For trees that have a bump or a branch at 4.5 feet above the ground, measure above or below the obstacle. Be sure to avoid any branch collars. If you don't measure at 4.5 feet above the ground, make sure that you also measure the height of measurement. Tree diameter checklist. Are you using the diameter side of the tape? Is the tape level? Is the tape pulled snug? Are you reading the numbers correctly? Are you measuring diameter at 4.5 feet or 1.3 meters above the ground? If not, have you measured and recorded the height of measurement? That's it. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, so hopefully you enjoyed that video. One final comment is just if you have a regular measuring tape, as Vanessa mentioned in the video, you can actually just take the circumference. No problem, we'll be able to calculate the diameter based on geometry. So heads up on that. So the next field that we're interested in measuring is the size of the tree canopy. So the way that we do that is that we use the measuring tape. Basically just have a friend or, make sure it's at the bottom or at the side of the trunk of the tree. And basically walk along the northern length to start. So when you walk along the northern length, continue to look up to see where the tree branches end. Or if it's a really bright and sunny day, you can actually use the shade that's on of the tree, if you can see it, to basically figure out where to stop. Only other comment on this in terms of getting that length is that occasionally your measuring tape might be a little bit too short on those bigger trees, which in that case you can kind of mark the ground and then continue measuring and back up. Or you can have a friend kind of like hold your place and then you can continue to use the measuring tape so that you can get a single northern length. And basically what we want you to do is once you get that length is record it. But then continue to go around the cardinal directions of that tree. So once you finish the northern length, go around to the east, south, and west, just so that we're getting 4 distinct measurements. And what we use those measurements for is essentially to figure out, how big is that oval around the tree? Like, where is the shade canopy ending? So, basically going around all the points of the tree will help us figure that out. So hopefully that's straightforward. And the next field that we're interested in measuring is the percent permeable surface around the tree. So this is, if you recall at the very beginning of this webinar, I mentioned that you might want a 33-foot string that's been pre-cut. And this is where it comes in. So essentially what you can do is either just have a friend hold the string at the base of the tree, or you can put a garden stake on it and just stick it in the ground. But what we want you to do is actually walk all the way out to 33 feet. And then kind of walk back and forth around the tree to kind of visualize an imaginary circle around that tree. And within that imaginary circle, what we're asking then is, how much of the circle, percentage-wise, is actually permeable. And the reason that we ask you to actually cut this string and use a real measure is because if you're anything like me, most people are really bad at visualizing distances. Because we find that if you tell someone, oh, walk out 33 feet, they could actually be stopping, at 15 feet, at 10 feet, 33 feet is actually quite a long distance. So again, that physically cut string will help you immensely with this particular field task and ensure that's consistent. So as a reminder of what permeable surfaces are, so essentially the definition of permeable is any surface that allows water to pass. So for example, if you've got a lawn or vegetation or soil or gravel or something, any other surface that allows water to percolate, that would be considered permeable. And on the very opposite end of the spectrum are impervious surfaces. So these are things like asphalt or sidewalk or parking lots or buildings or other things that aren't really letting the water percolate through to the soil. So on the field measure, we again ask what percentage of that surface within that imaginary circle is actually permeable. Basically the hard part is where you're kind of in between these two opposites. So if you're in the middle of a park where you're completely surrounded by grass, it's very easy to say, oh yeah, it's 100% permeable. However, if you're in a situation where, maybe you're in a median or someplace where it's mixed use, you might get some areas that are sidewalk or, some parts that are lawn, and it's all within this circle. Basically, we have these very broad percentage categories to choose from in that situation. So these are basically cut up by thirds. So, we have 95 to 66% permeable, or 65 to 36%, or 35 to 6%. So it is pretty broad, and we kind of treat it as like high, medium, low within that mixed surface situation. And we understand that it can be somewhat subjective. So, just use your best judgment and do the best you can. However, we do also have a visual guide available on the Dropbox. So this is just a separate guide that gives you some common measures or common field of references for determining what a percentage a mark is. So what the guide basically does is it translates the percentages into something common, let's say like a queen size bed or a 1-bedroom apartment, to kind of give you a gauge of how much area a particular surface is taking up. So definitely feel free to use that and download it for your own purposes or hand them out to your volunteers. So that resource is totally yours in terms of getting an estimate for those permeable surfaces. So essentially just check the box and that data field is complete. And that's pretty much it. So in terms of field tasks, pretty simple. So in terms of going down the list, again, we use the GPS coordinates to just determine your exact location of the tree you're measuring. We need the tree species in order to correlate those traits to that specific tree species. We use the trunk diameter to help determine size and growth of the tree. And we use canopy width to help determine the shade cover or cooling benefit that tree is providing. And the percent permeable surface, again, helps us address that microclimates question of, urban heat island effect and so on and so forth. So all these fields are valuable, but hopefully in terms of data collection, it's very simple and straightforward, which is where we come to in terms of submitting data. So I wanted to make sure that you understand the different options available to you. So before I start, it is helpful to note that even if you, for example, you don't have a smartphone, or you for sure are going to use your smartphone and nothing else, I think it's still useful to understand both methods, just in case you're with people in a group that may or may not have a smartphone or may prefer to use the pen and paper option. So let's start off with the pen and paper option. So this is the situation where, you have a GPS device. Not a lot of people in your group have smartphones. So it's easier for you to go ahead and go to the Dropbox and print out the data collection sheets and kind of fill that in by hand. So basically to return data to the lab in this scenario, we do have a couple different options for you. So these options are basically ranked on how much you want our grad student to like you at the end of the day. We understand your volunteers. We'll take whatever data you can provide us in any form that you can. So basically pick the option that's easiest to you. But in terms of preference from the lab or minimal work, this is basically how the ranking goes. So to start off, the easiest and way to get data back to the lab is basically by filling out an Excel spreadsheet. So we have that spreadsheet template on the Dropbox. And what you can do is basically fill in all the fields off of those raw data collection sheets and basically save that. and send it along with a scan of all the raw data collection sheets. So essentially it's a single email to the lab saying, here, I already typed this in for you, so you can copy paste. And here are the raw data collection sheets, so you can check that as backup. So that's the number one preferred option. If you don't really have the time, which is totally fine by us, you can always just scan just the raw data collection sheets, and then the grad students of the lab will go ahead and just type in that data for you. So feel free to email that. Or if you really don't want to have very minimal time and you don't want to mess with the computer all that much, what you can do is actually just print out the cover sheet template that we have with your information, so just your name and like all the information for mailing it. Print that out, stick that with your raw data collection sheets, and put it all into an envelope, and snail mail it to the lab, and we'll get it as well, and then we can process the data from there. So feel free to take advantage of any of those three options, regardless of how you collect it. We still want the data, so whatever you can provide. Also, don't forget to collect and include email addresses if you're using this option. So any participants that went out with you, again, if we want to be able to loop them in on the monthly newsletter and keep track of our program progress, just go ahead and put that on the cover sheet if you're doing the snail mail option. Or the Excel spreadsheet also has a tab where you can actually fill in the email addresses of the people who came with you. So either way, if you can include that information, that would be great. And that basically wraps up the pen and paper option, where so now I'm going to go into the iNaturalist option, which is where if you have a smartphone, this is what you should follow. So in that case, the iNaturalist users should just be forwarded the e-newsletter. So that's more on you in terms of actually forwarding them the newsletter so that they can subscribe themselves if they want to stay in the loop. So as the team leader, you'll be on those distributions and you'll be able to do that. Okay, so let's go into the smartphone option. So in terms of having your smartphone out, what I recommend is actually putting pause and actually going to the third-party app store and actually finding and downloading iNaturalist. So feel free to go ahead and pause this webinar and go do that on your smartphone, because this next section will be really helpful for that. Okay, so assuming you've downloaded the iNaturalist app to your smartphone, the next step is essentially to open up the app and go ahead and search and find the focal tree project. So how you do that is if you're on the home screen of iNaturalist, if you look to the left where that graphic is, there's a red circle where those three lines that jut across, which is basically the menu. If you tap on that, it'll reveal this drop-down menu of My Observations, Explore Projects, and what you want to click on next is Projects. So after you clicked on Projects, it'll then take you to another window where it says Projects. And I think it defaults you to Join, but what you want to click on in terms of tabs is Nearby. So when you go to Nearby, there's a search field right here where you can type in focal trees. And if you type in focal trees, essentially it just pops right up, and you can see our description here. And then you can click on that actual button to be able to unload or to load up the actual focal trees project. So once you've actually clicked the focal trees project, you'll see this green join button. And you'll want to click that in order to join the project. And once you do, it'll kind of slide over to the side and say that you've joined. And basically, you're ready to go and start creating observations. So once you've joined the project, you'll be able to click the checklist option. And what that'll do, it'll take you to this window instead where it says Add Observations. And then you can then click Add Observations to then fill out your first data point. So basically, if you're in this situation and you're in the field and you're about to add an observation, when you click Add, it'll take you to a pre-fill or an open form where you can actually fill in all the data fields we just talked about. So here you can upload your species name. You'll again see the data or the GPS function already loaded up. So basically, just making sure you leave that at the base of the tree long enough that it can get a good accuracy measure. You can also type in any notes you have, fill in all the different fields that we talked about, including circumference of the tree or, tree canopy size, percent permeable ground. And once you're done, you just click Save Observation, and that'll go ahead and load up onto our project. And basically just rinse and repeat, and you'll be able to upload as many data points as you would like. So hopefully either way, if you're using the pen and paper option or you're using iNaturalist, we could really use your help in your data. So basically, in order to get access to the Dropbox with all the information that I just talked about, as well as get subscribed to our monthly e-newsletter so we can continue to stay in touch with you regarding the lab's needs and so on and so forth, basically we want you to go to this website. So surveymonkey.com/r focal trees. So again, you can feel free to hit pause on the webinar or type that into your second window now. Basically, by going there, all we're asking for is your name and email, so we can actually email you all this information, and you can go ahead and get started. So once you've gotten that and got access to the Dropbox, you're pretty much ready to go. Essentially, in terms of next steps, all you need to do is just set dates for your data collection. Again, that's any time that's convenient for you or your friends or whoever else you want to take out, or if you want to just go out today, that's totally fine as well. And in terms of, just pick a park or area that's near you, or, your backyard or wherever you want to go ahead and measure. And again, you can borrow equipment from us, or you can go and get equipment. Again, that's pretty, simple, maybe a trip to Staples or just picking up whatever you have in your house. And basically you're ready to go. So we highly encourage you to go ahead and take friends or family members or go out yourself. Basically, the more data, the better. And hopefully that this webinar was comprehensive in terms of answering any questions or concerns about data collection or how to get started. However, if you do have any additional questions or you want to have additional discussion with me, I can be reached at eperry@earthwatch.org, so feel free to shoot me an email. Otherwise, we really thank you for your support. We could really use your help in data collection, and we really hope to see you out in the field and start receiving your data. So again, thank you for listening to this webinar, and we hope to see your results soon.